February 20th, 1944, 13:05 hours, 25,000 feet above Oschersleben, Germany. The air is a grid of contrails. American B-17 bombers hold formation. Their escorts, Republic P-47 Thunderbolts, fly a high weaving patrol. Below them, the Luftwaffe rises to meet the invasion. Focke-Wulf Fw-190s climb at their maximum rate. The engagement is seconds away. This confrontation was not about pilot skill, it was not about tactical doctrine, it was a problem of industrial mathematics. The historical record proves this. For every P-47 lost in combat against an Fw-190 during this period, the Luftwaffe lost 4.2 of their fighters. This ratio is the central fact of the air war over Europe. It is the story of how an arsenal defeated an air force. The German aircraft was the Fw-190. It was a masterpiece of aeronautical engineering. Pilots called it the Würger asterisk, the butcherbird. It was agile, heavily armed, and deadly. The American aircraft was the P-47. It was the largest single-engine fighter of the war. Its pilots called it the Jug. It was heavy, rugged, and built around a 2,000-horsepower engine. The German High Command believed in the superiority of their engineering. They believed their pilots, the Experten were superior. They believed quality would defeat quantity. This was a fatal miscalculation. The American strategy was based on a different logic. It was the logic of the production line. A report from Jagdgeschwader 2 dated after the Oschersleben raid states the problem. The enemy aircraft absorbs an unacceptable quantity of 20 mm cannon shells. Multiple pilots report exhausting their entire ammunition load to destroy a single P-47. The frequency of these encounters is unsustainable. This document reveals the two fronts of Germany's war. One was tactical, in the sky. The other was logistical, on the ground. They were losing on both. This was not warfare. It was attrition. The outcome was decided, not in the skies over the Reich, but on the factory floor in Farmingdale, Long Island. An assembly line is the most effective weapon in a total war. The doctrine of the Luftwaffe in late 1942 was one of absolute confidence. This confidence was earned. The introduction of the Focke-Wulf Fw-190 had been a shock to the Royal Air Force. It outclassed the Spitfire Mk.V in nearly every performance metric. The German fighter arm had achieved air superiority over the English Channel. They expected to maintain it over the Reich. This expectation was codified in official doctrine. The core belief was simple: German quality would defeat Allied quantity. This belief centered on two pillars: superior pilots and superior machines. The pilots were the Experten, aces credited with dozens, sometimes hundreds of victories. The machine was the Fw-190. A memorandum from the Office of the General of Fighters, dated November 1942, reflects this mindset. The technical and tactical supremacy of the Fw-190 ensures that any numerical disadvantage can be overcome through superior kill-to-loss ratios. The enemy cannot sustain such losses. This was not arrogance, it was a conclusion based on available data. The initial encounters with the USAAF Air Force appeared to validate this conclusion. Unescorted B-17s were savaged. Times the calculus of confidence. Asterisks. German High Command viewed the air war as an equation they had already solved. Their intelligence reports on American industrial capacity were often dismissed. Reichsmarshal Hermann Göring stated in a closed-door meeting, "The Americans can produce refrigerators, they cannot produce fighting aircraft." This was a fundamental misunderstanding of the enemy. It was a failure to distinguish between mass production and quality. The Americans were capable of both. The German view of American aircraft design was one of contempt. A technical analysis from the Recklinch-Lars Airfield Testing Center was blunt. The new P-47 Thunderbolt is an exercise in brute force. It is overweight, oversized, and lacks the finesse of a true fighter aircraft. It is a flying engine, not a weapon. This assessment was tactically correct in some respects. It was strategically blind. Ponis, the blind spot of doctrine. Asterisk. The Luftwaffe's combat doctrine was designed to fight a different war. It was optimized for short-range, high-intensity defensive battles over friendly territory. The strategy was annihilation. Inflict such heavy losses on bomber formations that the enemy would be forced to halt the campaign. This had worked before. An after-action report from Jagdgeschwader 26 after an early 1943 engagement noted the P-47's limitations. Pilots are advised to engage the Thunderbolt in a climbing turn. The American aircraft cannot follow. It presents an easy target. This confirmed the German bias. They saw a flawed aircraft. They did not see the system behind it. They saw a fighter that could be outmaneuvered. They did not see a fighter that could absorb an entire load of 20mm cannon shells and return to base. The High Command read the combat reports. They saw the victories. They did not read the production schedules from a factory in Farmingdale, Long Island. The war was already lost on paper. The Luftwaffe did not yet know it. The inflection point can be dated. July 28, 1943. The USAAF Air Force targeted the Focke-Wulf factories at Oschersleben and the AGO aircraft plant at Kassel. These were vital targets. They were also deep inside Germany. For the first time, the bomber formations would have fighter escort to the target and back. The escort was provided by P-47 Thunderbolts of the 56th and 78th Fighter Groups. They were equipped with 75-gallon belly tanks. The Luftwaffe's defensive strategy was predicated on the absence of such escorts. The German response was immediate and standard. Elements of Jagdgeschwader 1 and Jagdgeschwader 11 rose to intercept. Their Fw-190s were the designated bomber killers. Their pilots were confident. The first contact report from Lieutenant Klaus Brettschneider of JG-11 was logged at 9:42 hours. Enemy fighters sighted. Coordinates 53 degrees north, 9 degrees east. Identification, Thunderbolt. They cannot be Thunderbolts. The range is impossible. The disbelief was tactical. The presence of P-47 so far from England was a violation of known operational limits. The German fighters moved to engage. The doctrine was clear. Isolate the clumsy American fighters and destroy them. Then, attack the bombers. Oberleutnant Heinz Nock led his squadron into the attack. His post-mission combat report is a primary document of tactical shock. My flight engaged 4 P-47s in a diving attack. I selected the rearmost aircraft and opened fire. The enemy did not attempt to engage in a turning fight. This was the first lesson. The Americans would not fight on German terms. Nock continued. The enemy aircraft dove away. The acceleration was unbelievable. We could not follow. The P-47's weight, a liability in a turn, became a decisive asset in a dive. The aircraft was a gravity-powered sledgehammer. Other German pilots attempted to force the classic dogfight. The results were consistent. A report from an unnamed pilot of JG-1. I successfully positioned myself on the tail of a Thunderbolt. It presented a large, stable target. I expended a full burst of 20mm cannon. The rounds impacted the fuselage and right-wing root. There was no visible critical damage. The aircraft did not fall. This experience was repeated across the formation. The P-47 was absorbing punishment that would have disintegrated a Spitfire or a Messerschmitt. Alexander Kartveli had designed the aircraft around a massive engine and a durable semi-monocoque fuselage. It was not elegant, it was resilient. The Fw-190 was a finely tuned weapon. It was armed with 2 13mm machine guns and 4 20mm cannons. This was considered exceptionally heavy armament. It was insufficient. A debriefing of Feldwebel Erich Paulus stated the problem in logistical terms. To guarantee a kill on a B-17, we estimate 20 rounds of 20mm ammunition are required. The P-47 seems to require more. I cannot carry enough ammunition to shoot down a bomber and its escort. The tactical equation had been broken. The American pilots were not fighting for air superiority in the traditional sense. They were a shield. Their directive was to run interference. The 8.50 caliber machine guns of the P-47 had a different function. They were not designed for the precise economical destruction of a fighter. They were designed to create a wall of lead. A captured USAAF pilot, Second Lieutenant Robert S. Johnson, later recounted the American doctrine. We were told not to dogfight the 190. We were told to use our speed, hit them on a single pass, and keep going. The goal was to break up their attack runs on the heavies. The Germans were fighting a battle of annihilation. The Americans were fighting a battle of interference. On July 28th, the Luftwaffe shot down 15 heavy bombers. They also lost 17 Fw-190s in combat with the P-47s. The American fighter groups lost 9 Thunderbolts. The numbers were nearly symmetrical. This symmetry was a strategic disaster for the Luftwaffe. The Americans could replace 9 fighters and their pilots overnight. The Luftwaffe could not replace 17 fighters and their pilots. More critically, they could not replace the accumulated combat experience lost with each *Experten. The shock was not in the performance of the P-47. It was in the implications of its presence. General Adolf Galland, General of Fighters, reviewed the reports from the Kassel mission. His summary for the High Command was stark. The enemy has successfully escorted his bombers to a target deep within the Reich. Our previous defensive assumptions are now invalid. The war of attrition has begun in our skies. The German pilots had won many of the individual engagements. They had outmaneuvered the P-47s. They had scored hits. It did not matter. The physical sanctuary of German airspace was gone. The psychological confidence of the fighter arm was fractured. The enemy was no longer a distant threat to be met over the channel. He was overhead, and he arrived in numbers that defied military logic. The problem was no longer tactical. It was industrial. The Fw-190 remained a superior turning fighter. This was a fact. This fact was now irrelevant. The analysis of air superiority is not a matter of opinion. It is a problem of physics and industrial capacity. 20. The engineering post-mortem asterisk. The two aircraft were physical manifestations of their parent doctrines. The Focke-Wulf Fw-190 was a compact, lightweight airframe. It weighed 400 kilograms empty. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was the largest single-engine fighter of the war. It weighed 800 kilograms empty. The German design prioritized agility. The American design prioritized durability and power. A post-war interrogation of a Messerschmitt design engineer yielded this assessment. The Fw-190 was a surgeon's scalpel. We viewed the P-47 as a club, a very heavy, effective club. The core of the P-47 was its Pratt & Whitney R2800 double wasp engine. It was a 2,000 horsepower, 18-cylinder, air-cooled radial engine fitted with a complex turbo supercharger system. The Fw-190A was built around the BMW 801. It was a 700 horsepower, 14-cylinder air-cooled radial. The difference in horsepower was significant. The difference in high-altitude performance was decisive. The P-47's turbo supercharger allowed it to maintain power above 25,000 feet. The Fw-190's performance degraded rapidly at these altitudes. This was the operational ceiling of the B-17 bomber formations. The P-47 was designed to fight there. The Fw-190 was not. Type 2. The armament equation. Asterisk. The Fw-190's armament was designed for lethality against bombers. 4 20mm cannons and 2 13mm machine guns. The explosive shells of the 20mm cannon were designed to tear through an aircraft's structure. The The P-47 carried 8.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns. It carried no cannons. This was a deliberate choice. A USAAF ordnance report from 1943 explains the logic. The M2's rate of fire, ammunition capacity, and flat trajectory provide a dense cone of fire. The objective is not singular structural failure, but systemic damage to the target. A P-47 could fire its 8 guns for approximately 34 seconds continuously. An Fw-190 would exhaust its 20 mm cannon ammunition in under 15 seconds. The American pilot had a greater volume of fire. He had more time to inflict damage. Conversely, the doctrine divergence, *, German pilot training emphasized the turning dogfight, the Kurvenkampf. The Fw-190 excelled here. Its roll rate was 162 degrees per second. The P-47's roll rate was 120 degrees per second. In a sustained turn, it was a vastly inferior opponent. American pilots were explicitly ordered not to engage in this type of fight. The accepted USAAF tactic was boom and zoom. It leveraged the P-47's weight and power. The P-47's maximum dive speed exceeded 550 miles per hour. The airframe was strong enough to withstand the stress of recovery. The Fw-190 could not match this speed. It could not follow a diving P-47 without risking structural failure. A training manual for the 56th Fighter Group stated, "Altitude and speed are your life. Bleed them away in a turning fight and you will die. Use them in a dive and you will kill." Atreide, the logic of the production industrial, *. The decisive factor was not on the drawing board. It was on the factory floor. Germany produced a total of 248 Fw-190s of all variants between 1941 and 1945. Production was spread across multiple frequently bombed facilities. Republic Aviation produced 15 6.6 OP-47 Thunderbolts. The majority came from a single massive factory in Farmingdale, Long Island. At its peak in 1944, the Farmingdale plant produced 541 P-47s in a single month. This rate was greater than the entire Fw-190 production of all German factories combined during the same period. A memo from the German Ministry of Armaments, dated March 1944, acknowledged the problem. The enemy is not replacing aircraft on a 1-for-1 basis. He is replacing them on a 10-for-1 basis. This is not a war we can win. The American system was designed for modular repair. A damaged wing could be unbolted and replaced in hours. The German system required more specialized labor and time for major repairs. So, the human factor, attrition and training, *. The industrial disparity extended to pilot replacement. By 1944, a new Luftwaffe pilot arrived at a frontline squadron with approximately 150 total flying hours. A new USAAF pilot arriving in England had a minimum of 300 flying hours. This included extensive time on high-performance aircraft. The Luftwaffe was losing its Experten. These were pilots with hundreds of combat missions and years of experience. Their skills were irreplaceable. The USAAF treated pilots as a replaceable component of the war machine. A captured Luftwaffe squadron leader, Hauptmann Egon Meyer, stated during his interrogation, "We were a dwindling cadre of masters. They were a limitless flood of competent journeymen. The flood will always overwhelm the masters." The kill-to-loss ratio of 4.2 to 1 was not a measure of aircraft superiority. It was a measure of systemic collapse. For every American pilot lost, 4 German pilots were lost. The Luftwaffe was consuming its own future. The system could not sustain these losses. The outcome was a mathematical certainty. February 20, 1944, the campaign was designated Operation Argument. Allied planners called it Big Week. The objective was the German aircraft industry. The strategy was not finesse. It was brute force. The plan was to launch waves of heavy bombers so large, so continuous, that the Luftwaffe would be forced to give battle. It was a challenge, a demand for a decisive confrontation. The German High Command understood the ultimatum. To allow the bomber streams to pass unchallenged was to concede the war. To rise and fight was to risk annihilation. They chose to fight. The first mission of Big Week targeted aircraft assembly plants near Leipzig. More than 1,000 B-17 and B-24 bombers were dispatched. Their escort numbered over 900 fighters, P-47s, P-38s, and the first squadrons of long-range P-51s. The Luftwaffe response was maximal. Every available fighter group was scrambled. The initial contact reports from German pilots describe a new reality. A logbook entry from Unteroffizier Karl Schmidt, JG-26. The alarm sounds, another maximum effort. The sky is gray with their contrails before we even leave the ground. The German fighters climbed to their operational ceiling. They did not find vulnerable bombers. They found a sky saturated with American escorts. Hauptmann Wilhelm Moritz, commander of IJG-1, stated in his post-mission debrief, "My swarm of 4 aircraft was met by what I estimate to be 30 or more Thunderbolts. The engagement was not a fight. It was an exercise in survival." The American doctrine was not to seek dogfights. It was to form a combat box for the escorts, a layered defense the Germans had to penetrate. The P-47s flew high cover. Their mass and speed were used to break up the Fw-190 attack formations before they could reach the bombers. A surviving Fw-190 pilot's report from the first day. I attempted a diving pass on the lead bomber element. 3 P-47s descended on my aircraft. I was forced to jettison my drop tank and dive away. I never reached the bombers. This experience was universal. The day's combat was a chaotic series of high-speed passes and disengagements. The statistics for February 20th were calculated that night. The 8th Air Force lost 21 heavy bombers and 4 escort fighters. The Luftwaffe lost 77 fighters. The exchange ratio in air-to-air combat was catastrophic for Germany. The pattern repeated on February 21st. The targets were airfields and assembly plants near Brunswick. Weather was poor. The bomber formations were scattered. The Luftwaffe pressed its attacks with determination. Again, the escorts intervened. A report from the 56th Fighter Group. Enemy fighters engaged in force. P-47s of this group claimed 19 enemy aircraft destroyed for the loss of 2 of our own. The official Luftwaffe tally for the day was 41 fighters lost. The USAAF lost 8 fighters. The industrial logic was now playing out in real time. The American arsenal was consuming the German Air Force. A communications intercept from a German ground controller to his fighters was logged by the Allies. "Return to base. Refuel, rearm, you must go up again. That is an order." The strain was not only in the air. It was on the ground crews, the fuel supplies, and the dwindling reserves of experienced pilots. After a 2-day pause for weather, the offensive resumed on February 24th. The target was Gotha. The Luftwaffe committed every available Fw-190 and Bf-109. The result was a slaughter. The German formations were broken up by the high-cover P-47s long before reaching the bombers. Individual dogfights erupted across a 100-mile front. A USAAF 78th Fighter Group report summarized the prevailing tactic. Fighter-to-fighter engagements are secondary. The primary mission is to force German interceptors to jettison external stores and break off attacks on the bomber stream. The tactic worked. The Luftwaffe lost 53 fighters on February 24th. The commander of Jagdgeschwader 1 *, a veteran ace, was killed in action. The commander of Jagdgeschwader 11 * was shot down and wounded. The command structure of the German fighter arm was being systematically dismantled. By the end of the operation on February 25th, the Luftwaffe had ceased to exist as a decisive strategic force. The final numbers were the verdict. Total German single-engine fighter losses for Big Week were confirmed at 355 aircraft destroyed. The USAAF lost 97 escort fighters during the same period. The exchange ratio was 3.7 to 1 in favor of the Americans. The critical metric was not the machines, it was the men. The Luftwaffe lost 161 pilots killed or missing. This figure included 33 squadron and group commanders. The core of the Jagdwaffe's operational experience was gone. The USAAF could replace its aircraft in days, it could replace its pilots in weeks. The German losses were permanent. A post-war assessment by General Adolf Galland was blunt. Big Week broke the back of the German fighter force. The veterans we lost in those 6 days could never be replaced. The official USAAF summary was clinical. Enemy fighter opposition over the Reich has been degraded to a point where sustained strategic operations can proceed with acceptable loss rates. The battle was not won by a superior aircraft. It was won by a superior production schedule. The industrial mathematics of the Long Island arsenal had been proven correct in the skies over Germany. The operational consequence of Big Week was immediate. The Luftwaffe was no longer capable of mounting a coherent, Reich-wide defense. Its command structure was shattered. Its most experienced pilots were gone. Its replacement pipeline was producing undertrained novices. The skies over Germany were now open. This was not a victory in a single battle. It was the result of a successful strategic campaign of attrition. A post-war study by the USAAF Strategic Bombing Survey concluded, after February 1944, the German fighter force was relegated to a tactical, rather than strategic, threat. Its ability to inflict prohibitive losses on bomber formations was permanently eliminated. The strategic bombing campaign now proceeded with methodical lethality. Oil refineries, rail yards, and manufacturing centers were targeted with increasing precision and frequency. The P-47, its primary escort mission now less contested, was adapted to a new role. It became a fighter bomber, a mud mover. Its rugged airframe and 8 machine guns made it an exceptionally effective ground attack platform. A former pilot of the 365th Fighter Group recounted this transition. One day, we were fighting Fw-190s at 25,000 feet. The next, we were down in the weeds, shooting up trains and truck convoys. The Jug could take an incredible amount of ground fire and bring you home. The Fw-190 remained a dangerous opponent until the last day of the war. Individual German pilots continued to score victories. But these were isolated incidents. They had no strategic impact. The Luftwaffe was now fighting a guerrilla war in its own skies, a battle it could not win. Military historian Dr. Evelyn Reed summarized the situation in her work, The Industrial Front. To focus on the relative combat merits of the Fw-190 and the P-47 is to miss the fundamental lesson. The German aircraft was a superb tactical weapon. The American aircraft was the product of a superior strategic system. This system was the true weapon. It was a system of mass production, logistical depth, and a seemingly infinite supply of trained manpower. General Adolf Galland, in his post-war memoirs, was unequivocal. We had the better fighter. But the Americans had the time, they had the resources, and they had the numbers. We were trying to put out a forest fire with buckets of water. They had the ocean. The air superiority established by the P-47 and its counterparts was the essential precondition for the next phase of the war. The D-Day landings in June 1944 were conducted under an Allied air umbrella that was nearly absolute. A report from a German army officer on the Normandy front stated the problem from the ground. We have no air support. The sky is black with enemy fighter bombers. Any movement during the day invites immediate attack. We cannot fight a war we cannot see from the air. The P-47s that had once protected bombers over Oschersleben were now the terror of the Wehrmacht in France. The Focke-Wulf Fw-190 was a testament to German engineering excellence. It was a rapier. The Republic P-47 Thunderbolt was a testament to American industrial might. It was a sledgehammer. The outcome of their confrontation was predetermined by the economic and organizational realities of the nations that built them. One was a product of a craftsman's workshop. The other was the product of an assembly line. A former engineer from the Focke-Wulf plant at Marienburg was interrogated in 1945. His statement was not about aerodynamics. It was about logistics. We would produce 5 aircraft, the bombers would come, the factory would be rubble, we would rebuild and produce 3 more. Then the bombers would return. How do you fight such an enemy? The question was rhetorical. The answer had been delivered daily from the factory doors in Farmingdale, Long Island. It was delivered by thousands of pilots flying thousands of aircraft across thousands of miles of hostile sky. It was an answer written in production schedules and attrition rates. The air war was not a contest of pilot skill. It was a problem of industrial mathematics. The final analysis is not tactical, it is logistical. A superior weapon is strategically irrelevant when confronted by a superior arsenal.